Not all canned foods are created equal. Some of them are ticking time bombs sitting quietly in your pantry right now. Hidden preservatives, toxic linings, and cans that won't even last as long as the label claims. These are the kinds of mistakes that could secretly sabotage your survival plan. Today, we're cutting through the shiny labels and supermarket hype to expose the 7 canned foods you should never stockpile if you're serious about long-term survival. Because the truth is, not every can belongs in your prepper stash, and some of them could do more harm than good when it matters most. You might think you're safe with your pantry stacked to the ceiling, but trust me, a few of these will absolutely shock you, especially item number 2 on the list. Number 7, canned pasta meals. Now let's talk about canned pasta meals. You know, the Chef Boyardees, the raviolis, the spaghetti rings floating around in that bright red sauce. They look convenient, they look filling, and if you're standing in the aisle during a grocery run, you might think, hey, this would be perfect in a blackout. But here's the problem. These cans are one of the biggest survival traps you can stockpile. First off, the sodium. These things are absolutely swimming in salt. We're talking a single can packing over half of your daily sodium intake in just one sloppy serving. Sure, in a crisis, you'll sweat more, you'll be stressed, you'll be burning calories, but relying on sodium bombs like this doesn't give your body the nutrients it actually needs. All you're doing is tricking yourself into feeling full while setting up your system for dehydration, fatigue, and eventually serious health problems if this is all you're eating. Second, let's talk about nutrients, or more accurately, the lack of them. Canned pasta meals are basically refined carbs and sugar dressed up as a meal. The pasta itself? Overcooked mush. The sauce? A glorified sugar slurry with barely enough tomato to count. And protein? Don't count on it. If you're lucky, you might get a few crumb-sized meatballs floating around in there, but the protein quality is so poor it barely registers. In other words, these cans look filling, but nutritionally, they're empty. And in a survival setting, that's a disaster. You need calories that work for you, calories that repair muscles, keep your brain sharp, and fuel you through long stretches without rest. A can of ravioli isn't going to cut it. Now let's address shelf life. The label might boast 2 to 3 years, but anyone who's opened one of these a year past its best buy date knows the truth. The quality nosedives fast. The pasta turns to mush, the sauce separates, and the taste, well, imagine metallic ketchup mixed with cardboard noodles. Not exactly the morale boost you need when you're already under stress. Compare that to a good can of beans or tuna, which can last 5 years or more and still be edible. It's not even close. Pasta meals don't just age poorly, they become borderline inedible. And let's not forget the preservatives and additives. These cans are loaded with chemicals to keep that mush shelf stable. But those same chemicals are doing your body no favors. In fact, many of the additives have been linked to stomach irritation, headaches, and long-term health concerns. You don't want your survival stash to turn into a slow-motion science experiment on your gut. Here's the real danger: false security. When you see a pantry shelf lined with pasta cans, it looks like you're prepared. It feels like you've got meals ready to go. But it's a mirage. In a true crisis, you'll run through those cans quickly, you'll be undernourished, and you'll be left weaker than when you started. It's basically mushy noodles swimming in salty sugar water, not exactly the fuel you'll need when times get tough. So what's the smarter move? If you want pasta in your prep, go for dry pasta stored properly in airtight containers, paired with canned tomatoes or shelf-stable sauce. That combo lasts longer, takes up less space, and gives you actual control over what goes into your body. Number 6, canned soups and cream-based stews. Next up, we've got canned soups and those cream-based stews. Now, at first glance, these might seem like the perfect prepper food. After all, soup is comforting, it's warm, and it's easy to heat up even over a small fire or camping stove. But here's the cold reality. Most of these cans are far more trouble than they're worth. Let's start with the basics. Sodium. Just like with canned pasta, soups are notorious for packing insane amounts of salt. Even the so-called healthy ones will give you over 1,000 milligrams per serving. And remember, most cans are 2 servings, not 1. In survival situations, salt-heavy meals can wreck you. Instead of hydrating you, they dehydrate you. Instead of keeping your energy balanced, they drain it. And in long-term scenarios, that kind of diet sets you up for hypertension, heart strain, and a constant feeling of thirst you may not be able to quench. But sodium isn't the only problem. A lot of canned soups are full of fillers like starches, gums, and flavor enhancers that pad out the can without providing real nutrition. Think about it. How often do you find actual chunks of meat in those cans? Usually it's a tiny cube or two floating in a watery broth. Even the creamier varieties aren't much better. They might feel richer, but what you're really getting is fat, preservatives, and questionable dairy substitutes that break down fast in storage. And that brings us to the shelf life issue. Cream-based stews, chowders, and creamy chicken soups don't hold up nearly as long as their broth-based counterparts. They might be stamped for a couple years, but in reality, the fats and dairy components inside start to separate, curdle, or even spoil much sooner. That's risky in normal times, but in a survival setting, it could be a nightmare. Imagine banking on that can of chicken and cream to get you through a cold night, only to crack it open and find something that smells like sour paint. Not only is that food wasted, but now you've got one less meal when every calorie counts. And there's a bigger danger here too: contamination. Cream-based soups are particularly susceptible to botulism if a can gets dented, rusts, or suffers even a small breach in its seal. Botulism is rare, but when it strikes, it's deadly. The last thing you want during a crisis is to gamble your health on a can of soup that looked okay but turned into a toxin factory inside. Let's also talk about weight versus value. Cans of soup are heavy, they take up a lot of space, and they deliver very few calories compared to their bulk. One can of cream of mushroom might weigh nearly a pound, but only give you 150 calories. Compare that to beans, rice, or peanut butter, and the math doesn't add up. In prepping, every square inch of space and every ounce of weight matters, so wasting it on calorie-light soup is just bad strategy. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a time and place for soup. If you're sick, a hot broth can be soothing, but as a core prepper item, as a staple for long-term survival, forget it. That can of chicken and cream might comfort you on a rainy day, but in a blackout survival scenario, it could be a fast track to food poisoning. Instead, if you really want soups in your plan, learn to make your own. Store dry bouillon cubes, dehydrated veggies, or freeze-dried soup mixes. They last longer, weigh less, and you control the quality. Then, when you do need comfort food, you can whip up a pot without relying on a questionable can that might betray you when you need it most. So yes, soups and cream stews feel like a cozy prep, but when you look past the label, they're a prepper pitfall: heavy, short-lived, and nutritionally weak. And in survival, you don't get points for cozy. You get points for smart, sustainable choices that actually keep you alive. Number 5, canned fruit in syrup. At first glance, canned fruit feels like a win. It looks colorful, it feels refreshing, and you might think, hey, at least I'm getting some vitamins in with all this prepping. But here's the dirty secret about canned fruit, especially the kind that's packed in syrup. It's more sugar bomb than survival food. Let's start with what's inside that can. Fruit itself is naturally sweet and already contains sugar, but once companies drown it in syrup, you're looking at a can that can rival soda in sugar content. Some cans of peaches or pears in heavy syrup pack over 30 grams of added sugar. That's not survival fuel, that's basically dessert in disguise. And while you might get a quick burst of energy from all that sweetness, the crash comes just as fast. One moment you're buzzing, the next you're sluggish, irritable, and craving more sugar. In a survival setting, that roller coaster is the last thing you want. You need steady, reliable energy, not a crash that leaves you dragging. Next up, shelf life. A lot of people assume canned fruit lasts forever, but here's the reality. Those cans don't go the distance the way beans, tuna, or even peanut butter do. Canned fruit tends to hold for maybe 18 months to 2 years at best before the texture and taste start breaking down. And when it's packed in syrup, the sugar can actually accelerate that breakdown. The fruit gets mushy, the liquid turns darker, and before long, it's more like a jar of fruity sludge than anything resembling food. Compare that to freeze-dried strawberries or dehydrated apples, which can stay crisp and edible for 10-20 years if stored right. There's no contest. Now let's talk about the can itself. Acidic foods like fruit interact more aggressively with the metal lining of the can, which means higher risk of BPA leaching. BPA, that's bisphenol A, is a chemical used in can linings that's been linked to hormone disruption, reproductive issues, and even higher risks of certain cancers. And when that acidic syrup sits in there for months or years, it speeds up the leaching process. So in addition to getting a sugar overload, you're also dosing yourself with chemicals you definitely don't want in your body long term. And let's be real here. The vitamins you think you're getting from that canned fruit, most of them degrade pretty quickly in storage. Vitamin C, for example, is fragile and doesn't last long once fruit is processed and canned. By the time you actually need that can in an emergency, the nutritional profile has tanked. All that's left is sugar, a little fiber, and maybe some trace minerals. Not exactly a life-sustaining package. Here's the bigger issue. It gives preppers a false sense of balance. You look at a shelf lined with canned peaches, pineapples, and cherries, and it feels like variety. It feels like you're covering all your bases. But in reality, you're stacking your shelves with empty carbs and sugar bombs that don't last. It looks sweet, but it's basically a diabetes starter kit in a can. So what's the smarter choice? If you want fruit in your survival plan, go with freeze-dried or dehydrated options. Freeze-dried strawberries, blueberries, or apples hold their nutrients, last decades, and weigh a fraction of a can. Even dried fruit like raisins, dates, or apricots are better. They're dense, they last longer, and they're portable. Pair those with some nuts or peanut butter, and now you've got a survival snack that actually fuels you instead of setting you up for a sugar crash. Number 4, canned fish with added oils or sauces. Now let's move to something a little smellier like canned fish, but not the plain kind. I'm talking about tuna in gourmet oils, sardines in mustard sauce, mackerel in tomato paste. These might look fancy on the shelf, but when it comes to prepping, they're a time bomb waiting to go off. Here's the deal. Plain canned fish like tuna, salmon, or sardines in water can actually be a solid prep. They're high in protein, full of omega-3s, and can last 3 to 5 years if stored properly. But once you start adding oils, sauces, or seasonings, the game changes and not in your favor. Oils break down. Over time, the fats in those cans start to oxidize, turning rancid. That rancidity doesn't just taste horrible, it actually makes the food unhealthy. Rancid oils can cause stomach problems, nausea, and in extreme cases, they can contribute to inflammation and oxidative stress in your body. Not exactly the kind of health problems you want in a crisis. And sauces? They're even worse. Mustard, tomato paste, or curry sauces degrade quickly, separating into a gross, unappetizing mess that makes the fish nearly inedible. That can of sardines in mustard sauce? Yeah, after a couple of years, it'll smell worse than the apocalypse itself. And let's talk about shelf life. Plain fish in water is already pushing it at 5 years. But fish with added oils or sauces, you're looking at closer to 1 to 2 years before the quality starts sliding. That means if you're not cycling through them constantly, you'll end up with cans that are more waste than food. And in survival prepping, wasting food is the ultimate sin. Another problem, calories versus portability. Canned fish with oils is heavier, bulkier, and takes up more space than dried or freeze-dried protein options. But despite that weight, it doesn't deliver stable, reliable calories over the long haul because of the risk of spoilage. And if even one can goes bad, the smell alone will ruin your appetite, not to mention your storage room. And don't forget about contamination. Fish is already one of the trickier foods to cook safely because of its protein and fat content. Add sauces or oils, and you increase the chances of spoilage or bacterial growth if a can gets dented, compromised, or stored in fluctuating temperatures. It's not just about bad taste, it's about actual risk of foodborne illness when you least need it. Here's the kicker. These flavored fish cans often cost more. So not only are you shortening your prep shelf life, you're also wasting money on products that don't deliver. In the middle of an emergency, you won't care that your sardines came in Mediterranean herb oil. You'll just want food that's safe, reliable, and filling. So what's the better option? Stick to plain canned tuna, salmon, or sardines in water if you must go the canned route. Even better, look into freeze-dried fish or jerky. Those last far longer and don't come with the rancidity risk. Oils and sauces are great when you're cooking in normal times, but in prepping, they're liabilities. At the end of the day, canned fish with fancy sauces is a luxury item, not a survival food. When the power's out and you're counting every calorie, you don't need luxury. You need reliability. And a can of mustard sardines sitting in rancid goo won't save you. Number 3, canned vegetables with salt preservatives. Now let's move on to canned vegetables. This one trips up a lot of preppers because at first glance it feels like a no-brainer. Vegetables equal nutrition, right? You look at a stack of canned green beans, peas, and corn and think you're checking off the healthy box in your stockpile. But the reality is, canned veggies are another prepper pitfall that can waste space and give you a false sense of security. First, let's talk about nutrients. The second vegetables hit that canning line, they're blanched, boiled, and processed at high heat to make them shelf-stable. And while that heat treatment kills off bacteria, it also kills off a big chunk of the vitamins you actually need, especially water-soluble ones like vitamin C and many B vitamins. So by the time those beans hit your pantry, half their nutritional value is already gone. And the longer they sit, the worse it gets. Compared to freeze-dried or dehydrated veggies, canned vegetables are basically nutrition lightweights. You think you're stocking up on vitamins, but you're really just storing soggy fiber. And speaking of soggy, let's talk texture. Open a can of spinach, and it's a slimy green mess. Canned carrots, mushy orange coins. Green beans, limp strings that taste more like the can than the vegetable. That might not sound like a big deal now, but in a survival situation, morale is half the battle. Eating soggy, tasteless vegetables day after day isn't just disappointing, it's punishing. And if you've got kids, good luck convincing them that a pile of canned peas is dinner. Stockpiling soggy green beans isn't prepping, it's punishing yourself. And let's not forget the marketing spin. Labels love to say fresh picked or packed at the peak of ripeness. Sounds nice, but don't let it fool you. By the time those vegetables have been processed, boiled, and sealed away, fresh is the last word you'd use to describe them. It's like calling fast food farm to table. Sure, it technically started on a farm, but it's been through so much processing that the nutritional punch is gone. Then there's the shelf life. Yes, canned vegetables can technically last 2 to 3 years, but the quality degrades fast. Colors fade, flavors dull, and textures collapse. By year 3, what you've really got is a bland, mushy, vitamin-poor filler. And unlike freeze-dried vegetables, which can stay crisp and nutritious for decades, canned veggies lock you into a short window before you're basically eating compost in a can. So what's the smarter prepper move? Skip the soggy cans and go with freeze-dried or dehydrated veggies. They retain more of their vitamins, weigh almost nothing, and last 20 years or more if stored right. Even dried beans or lentils pack more nutrition and versatility than a shelf full of limp green beans. Number 2, canned, evaporated, or condensed milk. Now this one might surprise some people because milk feels like an essential. It's tied to comfort, it's tied to childhood, and it feels like a versatile prep. A lot of preppers think canned, evaporated, or condensed milk is a clever way to keep milk on hand without refrigeration. But here's the truth. These cans are some of the worst long-term survival foods you could bet on. First, let's start with shelf life. Unlike most canned goods that can stretch 2, 3, even 5 years if stored properly, canned milk often struggles to make it past 1 year in decent condition. And once you're beyond that date, things go downhill fast. The texture changes, the color darkens, and the smell, well, imagine opening a can of sweet, metallic sour cream. Not exactly what you want when you're trying to feed your family in a crisis. Then there's spoilage. Canned milk is particularly prone to bulging cans, leaks, and souring. If you see even the slightest bulge, that can is done. Toss it immediately. But here's the problem. In an emergency, tossing spoiled cans means wasting precious food. And when you're counting every calorie, you don't want to discover that half your milk stash turned rancid before you ever needed it. And nutritionally, it's not nearly as reliable as people think. Condensed milk is loaded with sugar, making it more of a dessert ingredient than a survival staple. Evaporated milk is a little better, but it still doesn't provide the steady, reliable protein or calcium you'd expect. It's also heavy and bulky, delivering very little nutrition for the space it takes up. If your survival plan depends on a rusty can of condensed milk, you're already in trouble. Now let's talk about versatility. Sure, you can add canned milk to coffee or recipes, but in a real survival scenario, you're not baking pies or whipping up casseroles. You're looking for simple, filling, high-value foods. Canned milk doesn't fit the bill. It's fragile, it's short-lived, and it doesn't deliver enough nutrition for the risk it brings. And don't forget the taste factor. Fresh out of the can, evaporated milk has a weird cooked flavor. Condensed milk is cloyingly sweet. After months of stress and rationing, are you really going to enjoy forcing down can after can of sticky, syrupy milk goo? Probably not. So what's the better choice? Powdered milk. It's lighter, lasts decades when stored properly, and can actually be reconstituted into something that resembles milk without the risk of bulging cans or rancidity. Even better, powdered protein mixes can cover your dairy cravings while giving you actual nutritional bang for your buck. Number 1, canned, ready-to-eat meals with mystery meats. When most people think about survival stockpiles, the first thing that comes to mind is usually canned meat. It feels like the ultimate prepper staple that is heavy, solid, and with just enough salt to make your tongue shrivel. You picture yourself cracking open a can of Spam or Vienna sausages by lantern light, convincing yourself it's a gourmet feast while the world outside crumbles. But here's the hard truth. These so-called ready-to-eat meals are some of the worst things you could ever put your faith in. Let's start with the elephant in the room, the mystery meat factor. Nobody actually knows what's in these cans, and if you've ever read the ingredient list on potted meat, you'll understand why. Mechanically separated chicken, pork with ham, and the vague meat byproducts are not exactly confidence-inspiring. It's like they swept the slaughterhouse floor and said, "Perfect, let's feed this to people." In a survival situation, you need real protein that fuels your muscles, keeps your immune system strong, and sustains you through long stretches of physical stress. Instead, these cans give you filler meat stuffed with preservatives, fat, and salt. Basically empty calories dressed up as survival food. Now, some people argue that these canned meats last forever. Wrong. Sure, they'll sit on a shelf for 2 to 5 years without killing you maybe, but the quality nosedives fast. Ever opened a can that's past its best-by date? The texture turns from questionable to horrifying, the taste becomes metallic, and the smell, well, let's just say even your dog would hesitate. And if the can starts bulging or rusting, congratulations, you've just earned yourself a front-row ticket to food poisoning or, worse, botulism. Not exactly the kind of survival challenge you were prepping for. But here's the kicker. It's not just about taste or texture. The nitrates and preservatives used to keep these meats shelf-stable are linked to serious long-term health issues, including cancer. Of course, someone might say, well, if the world ends, who cares about cancer? And sure, in the short term, you'll probably be more worried about keeping warm and finding clean water than your 10-year prognosis. But why sabotage your health with junk that barely fuels your body when there are far better, safer, and more nutritious survival foods out there? Stockpiling mystery meat is like trying to run a marathon while eating fast food every meal. You won't make it far before your body gives up. So yes, Spam might survive a nuclear blast, but your body sure won't if you rely on it as your main diet. If you're serious about prepping, it's time to stop romanticizing these old-school cans of mystery meat and start stocking foods that actually nourish, energize, and protect you. Because when the grid goes down, the last thing you want is your lifeline turning into a liability. So there you have it, 7 canned foods that look like prepping essentials but will actually weigh you down when it matters most. The truth is, the wrong cans can be just as dangerous as having no food at all. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to hit that subscribe button because next time we're diving into the survival foods that actually go the distance. And I want to hear from you. What's the one canned food you'll never stock in your prep stash? Drop it in the comments.